Here's what nobody tells you about finding inner peace. It might make you feel more alone than you've ever felt in your life. And that's not a problem. That's the point. You've done the work. You've meditated. You've read the books. You've sat in silence. And then something strange happens. You find yourself at dinner with friends, and suddenly you feel like you're watching them from behind glass. You're calm, you're centered, but there's this weird distance now. You thought awakening would bring you closer to people, but instead it feels like you're drifting away. So what's really happening here? And more importantly, is this actually a problem? Or have you stumbled onto something that most people spend their entire lives avoiding? Let's talk about something that happens to almost everyone who seriously pursues inner peace, but hardly anyone warns you about it. You start your journey thinking that once you find that calm center, that quiet mind, everything in your life will just click into place. Your relationships will improve. You'll connect with people on a deeper level. You'll finally feel like you belong. But then the opposite happens. You go to that party where everyone's drinking and complaining about their jobs, and you realize you don't want to complain anymore. Not because you're better than anyone, but because you've genuinely stopped caring about the same things. Your coworker is stressed about a deadline, and you understand intellectually that it matters, but you can't seem to generate that same panic anymore. Your family is arguing about something trivial, and you're sitting there thinking, why are we spending our energy on this? And here's where it gets uncomfortable. People start to notice. They say things like, you've changed, or you're not as fun as you used to be. Or the worst one, are you okay? You seem distant, and you are distant. Not because you've become cold or uncaring, but because you've tasted something that they haven't yet. You've experienced a way of being that doesn't depend on drama, on noise, on constant stimulation and validation. This is the paradox of awakening. The very peace you've been searching for becomes the thing that separates you from the world you used to know. You wanted to escape loneliness, but the path to peace seems to lead straight through it. You thought you were joining something bigger, but instead you feel like you're standing on the outside of everything you once belonged to. So the question becomes, did you make a mistake? Should you go back? Can you even go back? Or is there something happening here that's deeper than simple loneliness? Something that our ordinary understanding of connection completely misses. The illusion of togetherness. Before we can understand why peace feels like loneliness, we need to look at what we usually call togetherness. Because most of what we think of as connection isn't actually connection at all. It's shared suffering. It's mutual distraction. It's agreement to pretend that certain things matter more than they do. Think about how most social bonding actually works. You sit around with people and you complain. About work, about politics, about other people, about your bodies, about the weather, about everything. And there's this unspoken agreement that if you're not complaining, if you're not participating in the collective anxiety, then something must be wrong with you. You're not being real. You're not being authentic. You're being fake positive. But here's what's actually happening in those moments. People aren't connecting through their shared complaints. They're connecting through their shared fear. The fear that if they stop complaining, if they stop worrying, if they stop identifying with their problems, then they won't have anything to talk about anymore. They won't know who they are. They won't fit in. We build entire relationships on this foundation. Friendships where the main activity is venting. Romantic partnerships where couples bond over mutual enemies and shared resentments. Work environments where people unite against management or deadlines or clients, and it feels like connection because you're not alone in your suffering, but you're not actually together either. You're just separately drowning in the same ocean. When you start to wake up, when you start to find actual peace, you naturally stop participating in this game. Not because you're judging it, but because you literally can't generate that same energy anymore. Someone starts complaining about traffic, and you remember that traffic is just cars moving, and getting angry at it is like getting angry at rain. Someone starts gossiping about a coworker, and you realize you don't actually care what that person did. And even if you did, talking about it behind their back doesn't improve anything. And this is where the loneliness starts to creep in. Because if you're not bonding through shared suffering, then what are you doing with these people? The old scripts don't work anymore. The conversations feel hollow. You're physically present, but mentally somewhere else entirely. But here's what you need to understand. That hollowness you're feeling isn't loneliness. It's clarity. You're not losing connection with people. You're seeing clearly, perhaps for the first time, that the connection you thought was there wasn't as deep as you believed. You were connected to people through your neuroses, through your dramas, through your ego's need to be right or validated or included. And now that those needs are loosening their grip, you're discovering what's actually underneath. Sometimes it's genuine love and friendship, sometimes it's not much at all. But either way, you're finally seeing the truth of it. And yes, that truth can be lonely, because the truth often is, but it's a different kind of loneliness than you've known before. It's not the desperate loneliness of feeling excluded or misunderstood. It's the spacious loneliness of standing in reality while others are still lost in their dreams. The death of your social identity. Here's something else that happens when you start waking up. The person you thought you were starts to dissolve, and that person had friends. That person had a place in the world. That person knew how to act at parties and what to say in conversations and what was expected of them. But that person was also fundamentally asleep, and as you wake up, they die, and everyone who knew them starts to grieve. Your social identity is basically a collection of habits, preferences, opinions, and behaviors that you've assembled over the years to fit in and be accepted. Maybe you're the funny one in your friend group, or the responsible one, or the rebel, or the peacemaker. You've been playing this role so long that you actually think it's who you are. Your friends think so too. They expect you to show up as that character every time. But as you develop inner peace, these roles start to feel like costumes that don't fit anymore. You're the funny one, but you don't feel like performing today. You're the responsible one, but you're tired of managing everyone else's chaos. You're the rebel, but you've realized that most of what you were rebelling against wasn't worth the energy. You're the peacemaker, but you've learned that some conflicts don't need your intervention. So you start showing up differently, not drastically, not dramatically, but enough that people notice. And they don't like it, because they didn't become friends with who you actually are. They became friends with the role you were playing, and now you're breaking the contract. This is one of the most painful aspects of awakening. You realize that many of your relationships were transactional in ways you never noticed. You provided something, a listening ear, entertainment, validation, a target for their projections, and in return you got to belong. But now you're not providing it anymore, not because you're being selfish, but because you can't access that false self as easily. It's like trying to put on a shirt you've outgrown. Technically possible, but deeply uncomfortable. And the loneliness that comes from this isn't about being alone. You can be surrounded by people and feel it. It's the loneliness of not being seen as who you actually are, of knowing that the version of you that people love is a version that no longer exists. It's the loneliness of being at your own funeral, watching people mourn someone you never really were. But underneath this grief is something liberating. Because if all those relationships were based on a false version of you, then losing them isn't actually a loss. It's a clearing. It's making space for something real. Maybe some of those relationships will evolve. Maybe the people in your life will be willing to meet the real you. Maybe they're going through their own awakening and they're relieved that someone finally stopped pretending. Or maybe not. Maybe some relationships end. Maybe some friendships fade. Maybe you find yourself with a lot more empty space in your calendar than you used to have, and that's okay too. Because that empty space is honest space. It's not filled with performances and pretending and exhausting yourself to maintain an image. It's just space. And space is exactly what you need to figure out who you actually are, without the constant noise of other people's expectations. The difference between loneliness and aloneness. Now, we need to make a distinction that most people never make, but it's absolutely critical for understanding this paradox. There's a massive difference between loneliness and aloneness, and most people use the words interchangeably without realizing they're describing completely different experiences. Loneliness is a feeling of lack. It's the sense that something is missing, that you're incomplete without other people, that there's a hole inside you that needs to be filled by connection or attention or validation. Loneliness is painful because it's based on the belief that you are fundamentally not enough by yourself. It's driven by fear, by the terror of being forgotten or abandoned or irrelevant. Aloneness is completely different. Aloneness is a state of being complete unto yourself, It's the recognition that you came into this world alone, you'll leave it alone, and in the deepest sense, your consciousness is a solitary flame that no one else can ever fully share. But instead of being terrifying, this recognition is liberating, because if you're already alone in this fundamental way, then you stop trying to escape it. You stop trying to lose yourself in other people. You stop making relationships into life rafts that are supposed to save you from the terrible burden of being yourself. When you experience true aloneness, there's a peace in it, a completeness. You're not waiting for someone to text you back to feel okay. You're not scrolling social media to make sure you still exist in other people's minds. You're not saying yes to invitations you don't want to accept just to avoid being by yourself. You're genuinely fine on your own. Not in a bitter, defensive way, but in a deeply relaxed way. And this is what freaks people out, because our entire society is built on the assumption that being alone is bad and being together is good. We're told from childhood that the goal is to find your person, build your tribe, surround yourself with community. And those things can be beautiful when they're genuine, but they become prisons when they're motivated by fear of aloneness. Here's the paradox, though. The only way to have real connection with others is to first be okay alone. Because if you need people, if you're using them to fill a void or escape yourself, then you're not actually connecting with them. You're using them, you're clinging to them. And people can feel that. They can sense the desperation, the neediness, the unspoken demand that they make you feel less alone. But when you've settled into your own aloneness, when you've made peace with the fact that you are fundamentally a solitary consciousness having a temporary human experience, then you can meet people without needing anything from them. You can enjoy their company without requiring it. You can love them without trying to possess them. You can be together without losing yourself. This is why the path to peace often goes through loneliness. Because you have to cross through the territory of feeling alone, really feeling it without running away, before you can discover that aloneness isn't actually a problem. It's your natural state. And once you realize that, once you really get it in your bones, then other people become a bonus rather than a necessity. Connection becomes play rather than survival. The loneliness you're feeling after awakening isn't a sign that something went wrong. It's a sign that you're finally feeling the aloneness that was always there, but that you were too distracted to notice. And yes, it's uncomfortable at first, because you've spent your whole life running from it. But if you can sit with it, if you can let it be there without trying to fix it or fill it, something shifts. The loneliness transforms into aloneness. The fear transforms into freedom. Why the awakened seem distant? Let's address something practical now, because this is where a lot of confusion happens. People around you are going to interpret your peace as distance. They're going to think you become cold, detached, uncaring. And in a certain sense, they're right, but not in the way they think. When you awaken, when you find real inner peace, you do become detached. But you're not detaching from people. You're detaching from drama. You're detaching from the endless cycle of problems that aren't really problems, worries that don't deserve your energy, conflicts that exist only because everyone involved is too identified with their own perspective to see the bigger picture. Imagine you're watching a movie with someone. They're completely absorbed in it. They're crying when the characters cry, getting angry when the villain appears, celebrating when the hero wins. You, on the other hand, can see that it's just a movie. You can appreciate the story, you can enjoy the performances, but you're not lost in it. You remember that you're sitting in a theater, that none of it is actually real, that when it's over, everyone will get up and go home. This is what happens when you wake up. Life is still happening. People are still caught up in their dramas and their stories. But you can see that it's all a kind of movie, not in a nihilistic way, not in a way that makes nothing matter, but in a way that puts everything in perspective. The deadline that seems like life or death is just a deadline. The argument that feels like a relationship-ending crisis is just two egos bumping into each other. The worry about what someone thinks of you is just a thought pattern that your mind has gotten stuck on. So when someone is panicking about something and you remain calm, they interpret your calm as not caring. When someone wants you to get angry with them about something and you can't generate that anger, they feel abandoned. When someone is drowning in their story and you're not willing to drown with them, they think you've become distant, but you haven't become distant from them. You've just become distant from the illusion that their drama is helping them. You've realized that joining someone in their panic doesn't actually help them. That agreeing with their catastrophic thinking doesn't make them feel better. That enabling their victim story doesn't empower them to change their situation. This is one of the hardest things about awakening. You develop a kind of compassion that looks nothing like what most people think of as compassion. You love people too much to pretend that their problems are as serious as they think they are. You care about them too deeply to reinforce their suffering, so you stay calm when they want you to panic. You stay quiet when they want you to agree. You stay present when they want you to get lost in the story with them. And sometimes this helps them. Sometimes your peace becomes a mirror that shows them how unnecessary their drama is. Sometimes they calm down just by being around you, like an anxious dog settling next to a relaxed human. But sometimes it just makes them angry. Sometimes they take your refusal to engage with their drama as a personal rejection, and there's not much you can do about that except let them have their experience and continue being who you are. The distance they perceive isn't distance. It's space. You're giving them space to have their experience without trying to fix it or change it or join it. You're giving yourself space to remain peaceful without taking on their energy. And space is exactly what everyone needs, even though it's the last thing most people think they want. Finding your tribe in the space between. So where does this leave you? You've awakened enough that the old world doesn't fit anymore, but you're not so far gone that you've completely transcended the need for human connection. You're in this weird in-between space, not quite asleep with everyone else, but not fully liberated either. You're feeling lonely, but you know going back isn't the answer. So what now? This is where something beautiful can happen, but you have to be patient with it, because what you're actually doing, whether you realize it or not, is sending out a signal. You're vibrating at a different frequency now. And while that frequency might be incompatible with a lot of your old connections, it's completely compatible with others who are vibrating at that same level. There are other people out there who have walked this path, who have felt this same loneliness, who have lost friends and confused family members and found themselves sitting alone on a Saturday night wondering if peace was worth the price. And they're looking for you just as much as you're looking for them. But here's the thing. You're not going to find them in the same places you found your old friends. You're not going to meet them at the bar or at the surface-level networking event or through small talk at parties. You're going to find them in the quiet places, in the bookshops and the meditation halls and the hiking trails, in online communities dedicated to inner work, in the eyes of strangers who see something in you that most people miss. And when you meet them, there's this instant recognition, this sense of, oh, you've been where I've been. You understand. You're not going to need me to be someone I'm not. We can just be real together. These connections are rare, but they're deep in a way that your old friendships never were, because they're not based on shared history or convenience or social obligation. They're based on shared consciousness, on mutual recognition of something true. But until you find those people, you have to be okay with the space. You have to make friends with your own company. You have to discover that being alone doesn't mean being lonely, and that peace doesn't require other people's approval to be valid. This is the final lesson of the paradox. The loneliness you feel after awakening isn't a problem to be solved. It's a transition to be moved through. It's the space between who you were and who you're becoming, between the connections that no longer serve you and the connections that will actually nourish you, between needing people and genuinely enjoying them. And in that space, if you can resist the urge to fill it with noise or distraction or rushing back into relationships that don't fit anymore, you discover something remarkable. You discover that you're not actually alone at all. You're connected to something so much bigger than any individual relationship could provide. You're connected to the awareness that's looking through every pair of eyes, to the silence that exists underneath all the noise, to the peace that doesn't come from anywhere and therefore can never leave. That connection was always there. You just couldn't feel it because you were too busy trying to get it from other people. But now that you've stopped searching outside yourself, now that you've settled into your own aloneness, you can finally sense what was there all along. The universe experiencing itself through you. Consciousness recognizing itself in the mirror of your own awareness. And from that place, any human connection you form is extra. It's a gift, not a need. It's play, not survival. You can love people completely while needing them not at all. You can enjoy their company fully while being perfectly fine without it. You can commit to relationships without losing yourself in them. So here's what we've discovered. The peace you've been searching for does lead through loneliness, but it's not the loneliness you feared. It's not the desperate isolation of feeling unwanted or unseen. It's the spacious aloneness of recognizing that you are complete exactly as you are, with or without anyone else's approval or company. The old connections that fall away weren't serving your highest good anyway. They were keeping you asleep, keeping you small, keeping you trapped in patterns of drama and distraction. Losing them hurts. But it's the hurt of removing a splinter, not the hurt of losing something precious. What replaces them might not show up immediately. You might spend weeks or months or even years in this in-between space, feeling like you don't quite belong anywhere. But that space is teaching you something essential. It's teaching you that belonging doesn't come from fitting in with others, it comes from being at home in yourself. And once you learn that lesson, once you really get it, everything changes. The loneliness transforms into solitude. The isolation transforms into independence. The distance transforms into clarity. You stop needing the world to be different than it is. You stop needing people to understand you. You stop needing validation for the peace you've found. And paradoxically, that's when real connection becomes possible. Because you're finally bringing your true self to the table, instead of the performance you think people want to see. You're finally available for genuine relationship, instead of using people to avoid yourself. You're finally free to love without attachment, to connect without clinging, to be with others without losing yourself. The paradox of awakening isn't a problem, it's the path. The loneliness isn't a sign you went wrong, it's proof you're going right. And the peace that seemed to separate you from everything you knew is actually the doorway to a deeper connection than you ever imagined possible. So, if you're in that space right now, if you're feeling that strange combination of inner peace and outer isolation, know that you're exactly where you need to be. Don't rush it. Don't try to force old connections to work or new ones to appear. Just be with what is. Be with the silence. Be with the space. Be with your own presence. Because that presence is enough. It always was. You're just finally awake enough to notice. If this resonated, there's more waiting for you in the next video.